Let's talk some chess. We've got a game from one of the favorite players of this channel, Mikhail Tal. This game was played in 1959 against someone named Vasily Smyslov. Tal's playing with white pieces, and he opens it up with e4. Smyslov responds with c6. We have d3 by Tal, and now d5 challenging this central pawn on e4. Tal ignores it and plays d2. Well, I guess doesn't ignore it. He adds some defense to this pawn on e4, and black plays e5, really expanding and setting up his pawns nicely in the center. Tal plays knight g to f3, attacking this pawn, which is currently undefended on e5, and black defends it with knight to d7, so adding a defender to this pawn. But this allows Tal to play d4, really fighting back in the center. Black takes on e4, and Tal takes with the knight on d2, so now these two knights are very nicely placed in the center and will be sort of hard to kick out. Black takes on d4, so now black has taken these two central pawns, but this allows queen takes on d4 by Tal. And already you can see Tal has three pieces out in the middle of the board, controlling a lot of important squares and a lot of critical space. Black has the one piece developed on the 7th rank, and then this pawn on c6, so already this is a better position for Tal, which of course happens a lot. He gets an advantage early and sort of pushes that advantage to the end of the game. Although in this game, as we'll see, the position actually does equalize, so I spoke too soon. Anyways, we have knight g to f6 by black, so attacking the knight here on e4. And Tal immediately does not want to give up this wonderful knight on e4, so he puts his bishop on g5, pinning the knight to the queen, so now his knight on e4 is safe. Black breaks the pin with bishop to e7, so now the knight is free to capture on e4 because now you don't have bishop takes queen because the dark squared bishop is blocking on e7, and Tal ignores it for now and just castles kingside, which is a nice move because obviously you tuck your king to safety, but you also set up a battery of the rook and the queen on this open d file, and now this knight is under a bit of pressure. It's well defended, but it's certainly under a bit of pressure, and if the knight moves and the white queen moves, then the rook is eyeing the black queen on d8, so a nice move to get the rook on the same file as the queen. Black castles kingside. Sorry, we move this back. Black castles kingside, so now we have an exciting setup where both sides have castled on opposite sides, and now it's a race to see who can attack and get at the opponent's king faster. I always love these types of games. And Tal strikes first with the aggressive knight to d6. So, probably the reason why Tal didn't want to give up this knight on e4 is he has bigger plans for it, and now this is a very powerful knight. Of course, it's controlling plenty of squares in black's camp, and this is obviously something that you don't want to have to deal with the black pieces. But first, we have queen to a5 by black, which is a nice move. This is the recommended move by the engine. You can capture this knight. The white knight on d6 is not attacking any important pieces yet. There's no reason to trade off the bishop, which is undeveloped, on c8, and then just have rook take. That would be fine for black. So this knight is not threatening to take anything just yet, and this is a really nice developing queen move that comes with the tempo because it attacks the a2 pawn, which is currently undefended. And obviously you don't want the queen attacking, capturing on a2 and then infiltrating along the back rank. So this is a nice aggressive move that ignores the knight for now. So Tal has a very natural and wonderful developing sort of counter attack defense. He puts the bishop on c4, and this achieves a number of things. First and foremost, it gets the bishop lined up with the enemy king. So now this f7 pawn is pinned, and the bishop will be very important in attack. It also defends the a2 pawn from the queen's attack, so that's super important as well. And finally, it connects the two rooks along the first rank. So now these rooks will be an important roving force for Tal moving forward. Here, black plays b5, and I should mention now the position has equalized. This is a fine position for both players. It's now just a case of, trying to fight and get to the enemy king faster, but this is an okay position for both sides. So this b5 move, of course, attacks the really strong bishop on c4. It's a nice move too because you want to start moving these pawns closer to the enemy king and sort of break up this pawn structure. And this is what's nice about when two players castle on different sides, is you can just push these pawns with reckless abandon because your king is not castled on this side, right? So you don't have to worry about disrupting your defensive pawn structure. Obviously, you wouldn't want to push these pawns with reckless abandon because your king is hiding behind them. But in this case, on the queen side, you can just push these pawns for the rest of time and try to break up this pawn structure. So that's the idea here: attack the bishop and get the pawns closer. And Tal, instead of moving the bishop or saving the bishop, he first plays this really tactical retreat, and he plays bishop to d5. And this is going to prove to be a very nice move for a couple of reasons. Right now, the bishop is attacking the knight, but this isn't a very useful attack anymore. It used to pin the knight to the queen on d8, but that has long since changed in the position. Now this knight is super defended by bishop and knight and even pawn, but you don't gain anything by taking the knight because another knight just pops up on f6. So the bishop isn't doing much anymore on g5, but it's doing a lot on d2. Specifically, it's attacking the queen on a5. So you're attacking the queen on a5, and you're also rerouting the bishop for potential other attacks. So a really nice move from a bishop that is no longer so good and now has become much better. So of course, black cannot take the bishop here because then bishop takes queen is good for white. So instead, the queen here just retreats to b6 out of harm's way, but keeping an eye on this a2 pawn, unless, just in case Tal moves the bishop off of this diagonal. But here Tal actually plays a kind of a surprising move, and this is sort of the first Tal-esque move of the game, or so it seems. It's not really, but he plays knight to f5, and this looks like a just blatant bishop sacrifice to the pawn, but it's not, because then knight would take the bishop on e7 with check, and this of course would be better for white because you've taken a piece and you have a tempo, and now black's pawn structure is sort of not great on the queen side. So he plays knight to f5, ignoring this attack on his bishop, and black obviously wants to keep this very nice dark squared bishop, so moves the bishop back to d8. But this is also going to be an important move in the position, so keep an eye on this bishop later on. And now you can sort of see already Tal's pieces are very active, whereas the two bishops here are just sort of stuck on the 8th rank, not covering a lot of squares. They're kind of hemmed in, and that's going to be important as the game progresses. So keep an eye on that. So now Tal throws in another sort of Tal-like move. This bishop has been attacked for the past couple of moves by the pawn. Tal continues to ignore it here and plays queen to h4. So this move is less obvious why it works. Now it just looks like you're giving away a bishop, and in fact, black finally just accepts the sacrifice and says, okay, I'm gonna take the bishop on c4. It's the best move. I don't really have another choice. But now you get queen to g5. So a wonderful little rerouting of the queen to g5 that now lines up the queen with the enemy king, and now combined with the knight, this is a potent threat. It's the most potent threat because if black makes a silly move here, then queen takes on g7 is checkmate because the knight is protecting the queen. So you have to deal with this threat with the black pieces, and the way that Smyslov deals with it is with knight to h5, protecting this g7 pawn. And this achieves a couple of things. So the bishop now, it opens up a discovered attack of the bishop to the queen, so Tal is forced to make a decision, and again, you can't take on g7 because then knight takes back. So nice little defensive move. The proper move here, at least for the engine, is to play g6, so kicking the, wait, is that the, yeah, this is the right idea, to play g6, so now obviously there is no g7, queen captures on g7, and this actually leads to a drawn position by repetition. So here, the knight is attacked. It's not really attacked because the pawn is pinned to the king, but so I don't know why I said it was attacked. Anyways, here the best move for white is to play knight to h6 check. This obviously checks the king, and the king doesn't really. It only there's two squares to go to, but there's only one that makes sense. And that's a g7, and we'll see why. But then you just get knight back to f5 check, king moves back to g8, knight back to h6, etc., etc. And this would be a repetition. And the reason why the king is forced to repeat back on g7 and g8 is because if the king moves to h8, for example, then this bishop to c3 move is super strong, because now you've pinned, you've lined up the bishop with the king, you've pinned the knight to the king, and now this is not very good at all for black. So this is a drawn position. If who knows if Tal would have accepted the draw, but here if you play g6, then you're gonna just get into a repetition, and the game will most likely be over. So would have been a well, I don't want to spoil anything, but it's nice to get a draw against Tal. It obviously happened a lot, but that this was the opportunity for black to sort of finish the game with just a draw with the black pieces. But this didn't happen. Instead, black plays a slightly more aggressive knight to h5, protecting this g7 move, this g7 pawn. And this is a fine move. It's not a bad move. It doesn't lead to an immediate draw that we just saw. And now we get the same sort of idea that Tal plays, but now there's a pawn on g7. He plays knight to h6, and this, of course, checks the king. You can't take with the pawn because it's pinned by the queen, so the only move here is king to g8. And now it's kind of unclear how to continue the attack. Well, first, you have to worry about this bishop attacking the queen, so first Tal just takes this knight off the board with queen takes on h5. And now black has a couple of options. You don't want to take the knight on h6 because of the move we mentioned earlier, bishop to c3, and this is just like mega losing for black. Yeah, this is very bad to have this bishop on this awesome diagonal, and now the g file is open, so that doesn't really work. The move that black plays is the move recommended by the engine. It's queen takes on a2. And now, we saw that black was successfully able to get rid of the bishop on c4 that was protecting a2. So now the queen has successfully infiltrated, and now black is actually threatening checkmate. If, Tal makes a silly move, then queen to a1 is checkmate because the king has nowhere to go. So again, like we said before, it's really exciting when you have kings castled on two different sides because there's like two simultaneous attacks happening, and it's hard to see like which, who's gonna win, who's gonna get to the opposing king first. So there's a couple of moves here that prevent checkmate, but there's actually I only see two moves that prevent checkmate. It's you can either play c3, so you give the king an escape square to c2, but that doesn't look very good. Tal plays the correct move, of course, which is bishop to c3, and this is a move we previewed in a couple of the other lines. The idea now is that you have the bishop beautifully lined up with the enemy king, pinning the g7 pawn, so the knight is no longer under threat of being captured, and that's good because this is a pretty useful knight, and we'll see it join in the attack later on, but it's cutting off the g8 square. It's threatening to capture on f7 if necessary, so pretty useful to have. And of course, most importantly, is that it opens up an escape square for the king on d2, so queen to a1 is no longer checkmate. And now here's sort of the critical position in the game. So this was the, this was the it's equal for both sides, but you have to be super, super careful. You can't play the wrong move or the position will fall apart. And here, unfortunately, for Smyslov, he did play the wrong move. I mean, it's hard to blame him. He's playing against Tal. Tal's a very scary attacker, and he tried to play a defensive move and get his pieces closer to his king. And this is a very natural looking move, so it looks very reasonable, but it's not, and the move is knight to f6. And again, looks like a defensive move. It blocks the line of the bishop to the king. It attacks the queen, which is great. It gets a piece closer to, protecting the king. It opens up the light squared bishop to join in the attack. It looks like a fine move, and it looks like it works, but the game is now completely lost. And it's because Tal has an awesome move in this position that just finishes the game. So see if you can take a moment and find that move while I give you a second. Okay, so, we saw Tal sort of sacrifice the bishop on c4, but he hasn't had an opportunity to sacrifice significant material yet in this game, which we know he loves to do. But here he has the opportunity to sacrifice the most material, and that is with queen takes on f7. And this is just this is an awesome move, brutal move to see if you're playing against it. Just crazy, just a crazy move, crazy queen sacrifice. Obviously, if you don't do anything here, the threat is queen takes rook on f8 with checkmate. So you have to address, whenever you play a sacrifice, there actually has to be a threat, right? And there is clearly a threat of checkmate here. So let's sort of see what happened. So here, well, first, let's see what happens if you accept the sacrifice. So if rook takes on f7, then the game is completely over, because you have this rook takes on d8 with check, and now there's a back rank mate in the next couple moves after knight blocks, rook takes, and then you can block again, but this is going to be checkmate. So you can accept the sacrifice immediately with the rook. What black played, which is the correct move, is queen to a1 check. And now there's only one move for the white king. That's king to c2. And now the d file is blocked, so there's no rook takes bishop on d8. with checkmate. So now black accepts the sacrifice and takes the queen, but now you have knight takes on f7 check, forcing the king to move to g8, and now you get rook takes on a1, takes the queen on a1, so Tal has won back the queen. And now Tal is just about to be up a piece in an endgame, and that's sort of all she wrote. So, but before we talk about that, let's go back to sort of the losing move we talked about. So we mentioned this knight to f6 is the losing move. The correct move to play here is bishop to c7. The idea behind this move is it develops a piece, gets a piece out, but you still have this knight on d7, which blocks the rook from moving to d8, essentially. So now if Tal tried to sacrifice, then you can just take the queen, and there's no bishop to d8 checkmate because the knight is blocking. So that's why, obviously Smyslov didn't see this, but the knight on d7 is super important to prevent this back rank mate threat. So that's the whole idea. But once you move the knight to f6, now this threat is open, and that's why the queen can be sacrificed and obviously cannot be taken by the rook. So anyways, this doesn't lead to immediate checkmate, as we saw. You get queen to a1, forcing the king to d2 to block the the scope of the rook. But now after rook takes, knight takes, and rook takes queen, and now Tal is just up. Now you can see there are 3 pieces and 2 rooks against 3 pieces and 1 rook. So after king takes knight on f7, Tal plays knight to e5 check, and now this is just totally winning position for white. So black plays a couple more moves, king to e6, but knight takes on c6. Black puts the knight on e4, checking the king, but now just king to e3, moving the king closer up the board, getting a better position. Bishop to b6 check is played. Tal blocks with the bishop on d4, and in this position black resigned because this is just a completely losing position. Tal is up the exchange, so he has a rook for a bishop, which is obviously better, and Tal is also up a pawn and has a better pawn structure. These 2 pawns are connected, these 3 pawns are connected, whereas black's pawns are sort of islands. His pieces are more active. These rooks are easier to get into the game. This rook is sort of stuck until the bishop moves. The bishops are threatening to be traded off. The king is attacking the knight. So this is just a completely winning endgame for most players, and of course a player as great as Tal. So no finish, no finishing like beautiful mate, but I think the beautiful part of this game is this queen sacrifice on f7. And again, it was all made possible, unfortunately, by this knight evacuating the d6 square, which allows the threat of rook to d8 checkmate, eventual checkmate, to exist. So just an awesome game, and a kind of different sort of Tal game. I mean, we did see a sacrifice at the end, but it's not like Tal was just beating down his opponent the entire game. This was an equal position, and Smyslov had chances, and just one wrong move, and Tal will seize the advantage and finish the game. So thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Drop a like, drop a subscribe, and comment if there's any more games you want to see. Happy to talk about them, and we'll see you next time.